Hello friends, this is Chandrakant from Akul Mac Technologies. Welcome to yet another edition of Top Brass. Today we will talk about the plasma therapy. And there is a lot of news past few days about plasma therapy and it can cure COVID-19, etc. So let us go in depth of this particular type of treatment for COVID, and we will also discuss what are the pros and cons, how this whole thing works, and who can get benefit and who can administer this particular treatment. So before we start, little history on the plasma therapy. Uh, India became the third country today where the government has allowed use of plasma therapy to cure COVID-19 patients. China being the first one, US is the second, and India being the third. And when they allowed this, so when I say that the government has allowed, it's basically they have created the entire framework of medical and the legal protocols, procedures that states needs to follow. When I say states, all the states within India which are governed by the state governments, and then start curing the patients in their own states, in their own hospitals, by following the procedures and the protocol. So when I say protocol, it's basically the medical protocols. So let's talk about what is plasma therapy. Plasma therapy is basically based on the antibody which are generated automatically as a natural process within the patient's blood, and the antibodies are responsible for basically ensuring that there's no further infection or natural cure. So plasma therapy is a pure natural way of treating other person or the infected person, and this is a not something new. This is, I mean, if you go back to history within India and China, they were being used for last, as per recorded history, 1000 years. But in India, as per the scriptures, the ancient Indian scriptures, as way back as 2000 years back, and the plasma therapy was used in order to treat patients of various viral infections across India. And the Indians, people who had the knowledge of how to treat using plasma, were also invited in the Middle East countries, in Afghanistan and other lot of other countries where they used to go and treat the royals or the famous people in those countries. So this is a little bit on plasma. But how does this work? It works on the basic premise that a patient who has been cured of COVID-19, so it is assumed that the antibody in his body is is already out in the blood, and those antibodies can fight COVID-19 infection. So what happens is when the person is getting cured in the hospital, the doctors basically convince him to give little bit donation of his blood, and this donated blood is then used. They put inside a machine called centrifuge machine, which rotates at very high speed, and because it is rotating at very high speed, the centrifugal force which is applied on the solution will separate the plasma and the blood cells like white blood cells, red blood cells out from this. So the blood will basically get into different segments based on the centrifugal force, and from there the basic plasma with platelets, etc., is taken out. And so this plasma has the antibodies which can fight the infection, and then this plasma is injected into an infected person. So this plasma then start giving antibodies to the infected person, and then the infected person develop the immunity and start fighting the infection. So the initial phase of these experiments have shown across all countries, across China, across US, and also in Delhi, also in UP and some other states, where it has shown that the patients who are given the plasma start improving uh, their condition. So initially, this plasma was tried on a very acute infection of COVID. That means the person is having a lot of issues with the respiratory system and other things. So when the plasma was injected into those patients, they started showing signs of recovery. Their effect of respiratory infection reduced, and hence the antibodies are able to fight the COVID-19 infection. So this is a basic way of uh, you know doing the plasma therapy, um, but it has to be administered by an expert, because the condition of the patient, how much plasma is required, how much the antibodies is required in order to fight that infection. It has to be decided by the doctor, and the expert who's doctor also who's expert into plasma or immunology can determine before injecting into an infected patient how much he has to get antibodies needs to be given to this particular patient. Now this is not something new. This has been used in the past as well, and let's go back about 100 years back. There was a pandemic, global pandemic called Spanish flu in 1900s, where in the US and some of these Latin American countries, the plasma therapy was used uh, to fight that pandemic in 1918. And the Spanish flu is also known as H1N1 infection, which also reappeared in 2009. Again, the plasma therapy was used to fight the H1N1 in 2009. So there are two very big examples of plasma therapy being used to fight the pandemic. In between, there was SARS outbreak in Southeast Asia and East Asia, predominantly the Chinese belt, where again the influenza and the respiratory disorder kind of symptoms were there in 2001. And again, to fight this pandemic, uh, in those days it was called epidemic. It was not a pandemic, unlike COVID-19. But in case of SARS epidemic, the plasma therapy was used to cure patients. And not so long back, when the Ebola outbreak happened in Africa, the same technology was used to cure the infection of Ebola virus. And in 2015, the Middle East respiratory syndrome was also used to cure. The plasma was used to cure the MERS infection, which is Middle East respiratory syndrome. And so these are all the pandemic and epidemic related use of plasma treatment, plasma therapy. But there are diseases which constantly require plasma therapy treatments, which are measles, HIV, polio, and mumps. And constantly, these are the standard procedures to cure these infections. And as I said in the beginning, that the precaution is that uh, an intelligent person or a trained person can only administer the plasma therapy. That means for each patient, amount of antibodies which are injected has to be determined before giving this injection. There is nothing like a set quantity for everyone. So that is why it is required to be administered at the right hospital, which is expert in getting the plasma out properly, and also by the right trained doctor who has a lot of experience and training and expertise in immunology. So I think these are the precautions that we have to take care. But plasma therapy and the science which have been visible so far shows that the treatment is finally available to fight the pandemic, which is COVID. Now, when we say that there is a treatment available, there is a its own risk also associated, and that is why I reiterate my point of taking right precautions. That means going to the right doctor, right immunologist, right hospital, which has the ability, expertise, and infrastructure to carry out this kind of a treatment. So number one risk is that it's a natural process, but then when you're taking the blood out from another patient who has recovered from COVID and you inject the plasma, which is, you're not injecting the blood. You obviously, when you take the blood, you will do all kinds of necessary checks like checking all the infection, but still there is a amount of risk involved where you inject the plasma into other person. So the blood substance from one patient goes to other person. So this is one of the risks which is associated with it. It could bring some unknown issues with regard to patient condition. Number two risk, which is very, very important, if the plasma antibody fail to react in another patient, there is a huge risk involved of enhancement of the infection, because the person is already infected with COVID, and then this antibody from another person did not work on this person. His body failed to react to fight. Now you have injected extra stuff, and there is a chance of enhancing the infection in this particular patient. So that's a um, big risk. Number three risk is by inducing the external immune system into your body. There is a risk. It's not 100% risk, but there could be a few, 1 in 100,000 or 1 in 1 million kind of a person who will have a risk of his native immune system being suppressed, because now you're inducing immunity from another person. So there is a huge risk of the native immune system, not in everyone, but there could be one or two guys, 1 in million, 1 in 1 lakh. We don't know, because I think this is something very new. The trial and error will tell us how much is the fail ratio. But this is a risk here when you have an external immunity being injected into some other person. His natural or native immunity may get, reduced or may get overlapped. So that is another risk. So these are three major risks, but overall 99.99% this way of treatment looks very, very promising, extremely foolproof and extremely natural. There are no medicines required. There is no manufacturing of large scale drugs are required, and distribution on all those things. This can be treated locally at uh, bunch of patient can be treated locally at a local hospital, and so on and so forth. So you don't have a distribution challenge, you don't have a supply chain challenge, etc. Looks very promising. I think we should wait for another 10 days to see when other states in India start giving out results of how many patients they administered with this plasma therapy and how many got cured. I think uh, we can fight India as a country. As it is, our data is very good, but we can then start curing the infected patients. So this is my analysis. I welcome your comments, and I would like to engage with my viewers. Please share your thoughts. Let me know what you think, and I will meet you next time with more analytics on some subject. Until then, bye-bye.